Welcome to our tutorial on exposure settings in photography. Today we will take a detailed look at the three fundamental components of exposure: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO sensitivity. Together we'll discover how they interact and how we can use their combination to achieve perfect photos. These parameters are crucial for setting the correct exposure when taking photos. They determine how the final image will be lit. The main exposure parameters are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO sensitivity. These three elements together form the so-called exposure triangle. They influence each other to achieve the right exposure. Let's take a closer look at each one of them. Let's start with the aperture, expressed as an F number, for example f2.8, f4, f8 or f16. The aperture is an opening in the lens that allows light to pass through to the camera sensor. The size of this opening can be changed to regulate the amount of light hitting the sensor. A lower F number, such as f2.8, means a larger aperture opening, allowing in more light. This setting is often used in low light conditions or when a shallow depth of field is desired. A shallow depth of field means that only a small part of the image will be in focus, while the rest will be blurred. This is useful in portrait photography, where we want to emphasize the subject and blur the background. A higher F number, such as f11, means a small aperture opening, allowing less light. This setting is useful when there is plenty of light or when a greater depth of field is needed. A greater depth of field means that a larger portion of the image will be in focus, which is ideal for landscape photography, where we want the foreground, middle ground, and background to be sharp. Now let's talk about shutter speed, which is indicated as time in seconds or fractions of a second. For example, 1/1000 second or 1 second. Shutter speed determines how long the shutter will be open and how long light will hit the camera sensor. A shorter shutter speed, such as 1/1000 second, means the shutter is open for a very short time. This results in freezing the motion in the photo. When should we use short shutter speed? For fast-moving subjects like animals or sportsmen. And in landscape photography, for example, when it's windy, short exposure times reduces the risk of the photo being blurred by wind gusts. If we have flowers in the foreground that we want to keep sharp, a short shutter speed will freeze their movement, making all the flowers sharp, which is often desired. A longer shutter speed, such as 1 second, means the shutter is open for a longer time, allowing more light to hit the sensor. This setting is useful in low light conditions, such as dusk or evening, or when we want to capture movement. Longer exposures are often used in landscape photography when photographing water, like waterfalls, seashores, etc. Water captured with a longer exposure appears more attractive to viewers. The longer the exposure, the more blurred the water becomes. Of course, in this case, we must use a tripod. ISO sensitivity is indicated by a number such as ISO 100, 200, 400 or 3200 and measures the sensor sensitivity to light. Most modern cameras have an ISO range from 100 to 25,600. High-end cameras can have upper ISO limits in the hundreds of thousands. Low ISO, ISO 100, is understood as low sensitivity. It is used in well-lit situations, such as sunny days or well-lit interiors. Low ISO produces a very clean image with minimal noise. On the other hand, high ISO, 6400, means high sensitivity. It is used in low-light situations, such as interiors with low light or night photography. High ISO increases the sensor sensitivity, allowing a properly exposed photo, even in low-light conditions. However, higher ISO causes noise or various color artifacts. Simply put, ISO can be understood as artificial light added to the photo when natural light is lacking. On the one hand, it allows us to expose in conditions where we wouldn't be able to properly expose the photo without the higher ISO. The downside of using higher ISO is the mentioned noise and artifacts. Or we can say it this way: increasing ISO increases the sensor sensitivity to light. This means we can shoot in lower light without extending the shutter speed or changing the aperture. Exposure parameters are interconnected, and changing one requires adjusting the other two to maintain the same exposure. For example, if we increase the aperture, higher f number, we reduce the amount of light. We will then need a longer shutter speed or higher ISO to achieve the same exposure. Have you heard the term exposure value, or maybe the term stops? What is it actually? Exposure value, EV, is a number expressing the combination of aperture, shutter speed and ISO, leading to the same exposure. Generally, EV is used to recalculate exposure parameters. For example, if we increase ISO from 100 to 200, we increase the sensor sensitivity by 1 EV. This means that if we don't want to change the exposure, we need to compensate for this change by reducing the shutter speed by 1 EV or increasing the aperture by 1 EV. So example, we are photographing with a setting of f8, 1/60 seconds, ISO 100, and we want to increase ISO to 400. So we increase sensitivity by 2 stops, from ISO 100 to 200 and from 200 to 400. To maintain the same exposure levels, we must reduce the shutter speed to 1/250 seconds, for example. Remember, when calculating EV for time and ISO, it's always a doubling or halving in the case of 1 EV. If we are shooting night photography at ISO 25,600, but the noise is too high, and we decide to reduce ISO to 3,200, by how many EVs do we reduce the light? 25,600 divided by 2 is 12,800. Divided by 2 is 6,400. Divided by 2 is 3,200. So that makes it 3 stops. We must compensate this by adjusting the shutter speed or eventually the aperture. If the original time was 1 second, what will be the new time? 1 second times 2 equals 2. 2 seconds times 2 equals 4 seconds. And 4 seconds times 2 equals 8 seconds. 3 EV. By the way, we can set the step value to adjust exposure by 1 EV, 1/2 EV or 1/3 EV. Another example, assume we are photographing a scene with a setting of f4, 1/250 second, ISO 100. If we want to change the aperture to f8, which is 2 stop less light, we need to increase the shutter speed or ISO to achieve the same exposure. Increasing the shutter speed to 1/60 seconds, 2 EVs more light, maintains the same exposure. Increasing ISO to 400, 2 EVs more sensitivity, also maintains the same exposure. Another option is to split the compensation between the two, meaning you get 1 EV from the shutter speed and 1 EV from the ISO, adding up to the needed 2 EVs. Understanding and mastering exposure settings is a fundamental step towards fully utilizing the potential of our camera and achieving optimal results in photography. Each parameter offers unique possibilities, and their combination enables creative photographic expressions. Understanding this is the stepping stone for moving out of the auto mode and starting to unlock and explore the full potential of our gear. We hope this tutorial has helped you understand the basic of exposure parameters in photography. Don't be afraid to experiment and enjoy discovering photography with different exposure settings. If you would like a deeper dive into each of the parameters, let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and if you like the video, we would appreciate a thumbs up and a subscription to the channel. We look forward to seeing you in the next video.
By the way, have you heard that you can join us on our exclusive photography expeditions to Lofoten and Iceland? If you want to know more, check the link below.